A vertically split purple and gold background with a San Francisco State University logo with gold and white text reading Longmore Lecture, Scholar-Activism in 2021, presented by the Paul K. Longmore Institute on Disability.
Okay, so welcome everybody to the 2021 Paul K. Longmore Lecture on Disability. I'm Kathy Kudlick. I am a white woman with short silver gray hair, and I'm wearing red glasses and a uh, piece of jewelry that nobody can tell me whether it's a scarf or a necklace. So, and it's nice and colorful. I'm really glad you're here. Welcome to this event that's to honor our founder, Paul K. Longmore, who was a beloved historian at San Francisco State University for 20 years before he passed away unexpectedly in 2010. He was a scholar activist that modeled a lot of these intersections that we try to foreground in these lectures every year. When they wanted to honor his memory, they named the Institute on Disability that he had founded 25 years ago for him. And we have since then been doing a lot of online programs. We run Superfest Disability Film Festival. We have student fellows. We do all sorts of really exciting work. Thanks to many people that are our supporters who are here today. And by being here at all, you know, you're our supporters from all over the world. And it's just wonderful. I'm really, really honored. I'd like to thank you. And I'd like to thank our captioners, our interpreters, our student helpers behind the scenes, and especially my partner in crime at the Longmore Institute, Emily Smith-Badix. I have a few logistical things to talk about first. First of all, there's no Q&A in this. I mean, sorry, there's Q&A, but it's not chat. So if you're used to using chat in Zoom, we don't use that in this because it's not accessible for screen readers. It's a nightmare. And so if you have questions, type them into the Q&A box, and then a moderator will go through those and provide them to the moderator at the end of the program so that we can address those by the end if there's still time. Also, I'd like to invite you to discussion in social media. The hashtag on Twitter is Longmore Lecture. And also, if the Zoom captions are wonky, which they can be, and you'd rather view it on screen text, please visit tinyurl.com/Longmore captions. So without further ado, I'd like to hand things over to my friend and mentor and fellow advisory council member at Longmore. He's currently the vice president, Milton Reynolds, and he will introduce himself and the panelists and the entire program that we're going to have together. So thanks again from the bottom of my heart and all of our hearts, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I'm honored to be here with you all tonight, and thanks for making the time to be with us for tonight's lecture. So I'm really excited about this evening's panel, but let me start by introducing myself. My name is Milton Reynolds, and I am an advisory board member of the Paul K. Longmore Institute. In terms of my audio description, I'm a tall Black man with shoulder-length dreadlocks that are salt and pepper. I also have a salt and pepper beard that is more salt than pepper. And on the bookshelf behind me, there are a number of colorful books and other things. I use he, him pronouns. So with that said, I'm looking forward to speaking with our guests. And tonight we've got a really amazing panel. So on our panel, we have Amy Hamrai, we have Jen White-Wilson, and Liat Ben Moshe. And I think we're going to have a pretty scintillating conversation this evening and look forward to that. And so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. And I'm going to ask Amy to get us started by answering this question and introducing herself as she does. And so let me give the question first. So looking back at the events of this summer and in recent months, what have you noticed that has provided a source of affirmation for the work that you were involved in before these events kicked off? I'd also love to hear you speak to any provocations or challenges to your work that have also been surfaced in the moment. So, Amy, please join us.
Hello, thank you, Milton. This is Amy Hamrai speaking. I use they, them pronouns. I appear on your screen as an olive-skinned Iranian person. I have short, dark hair and rectangular glasses. I'm wearing a black t-shirt and I'm in a yellow room. So I was asked to introduce myself briefly also. I live and work in the original homelands of the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Shawnee, and Yuchi peoples in Nashville, Tennessee. And I teach at Vanderbilt University, and I'm also an organizer and a designer. And so thinking about the question of the events of last summer and in recent months, where I live in my community, and I take this question to be about racial justice uprisings, I think, and also COVID. So here in Nashville, where I live, there has been a very long history of anti-Black police violence. And so there's also a very long history of organizing around that. And I would say that the events of last summer don't feel out of continuity with everything that's been happening. If anything, things have just sort of been propelled really for the last like 60 or 70 years. This is one of the places that was the birthplace of the civil rights movement. And we also have had a number of high profile police murders that resulted in organizing toward a community oversight board for the local police. And so all of that has been very present. And a year ago, yesterday, there was also a tornado that came through Nashville and destroyed large parts of the city. The people who first responded to that and began organizing community and mutual aid, which is also a lot of the organizing work that I have been doing, were people who were already involved in these other activist struggles. So the communities that were hardest hit by the tornado were also communities that were historically Black and or currently rapidly gentrifying. And also a lot of disabled people were really affected by the tornado and by the coming of COVID-19. And so a number of mutual aid efforts started after the tornado that then became COVID-19 mutual aid. And I was, lucky to be part of that organizing with other disabled people here in Nashville as well. And so the challenges that came up that were different than other mutual aid work that we had done were just the fact that we couldn't be together. We all wanted to turn toward each other, share space, share food and resources, and we just couldn't because of the pandemic. And so this created opportunities for folks who were already involved in disability culture and really used to having events remotely and organizing remotely, often over the internet or over the phone, to kind of like lend our skills toward that. And so that has been really sustaining for me, that that was something that had been part of my life already, and it continued to be part of my life, and it just made it possible to have community through this time of isolation.
Thanks, Amy. I appreciate that. So let me call on Jen White Johnson, and my apologies. I had a typo there, and so I missaid your name. So sorry about that, Jen. Would you be open to
All
responding?
good. Yes, all good. Hello, everybody. Thank y'all so much for holding space for me. As Milton said, my name is Jennifer White Johnson, but you can call me Jen. And just a quick image description of myself. I'm an Afro-Latina, half Black, half Puerto Rican, designer, disabled designer. I'm wired with an ADHD brain, currently coming to you from Baltimore, Maryland. I have cinnamon skin, piel canela, which is what my uncle used to say when I was little. I also have ADHD, so I have a little bit of a stutter that I have learned to just live with and to celebrate, and to, you know, it helps me kind of keep my pace down a bit. And I'm wearing one of my favorite T-shirts of a symbol that I designed, and it is a Black power fist with the infinity symbol that represents neurodiversity, which is a tribute to my autistic son, and also to my own neurodivergent brain, and also to, you know, my disability community. And so underneath the infinity symbol, it says Black Disabled Lives Matter. The symbol actually rests on a gold colored t-shirt. And I'm wearing a black blazer, and I have my little pins on. And I have a gap in my teeth. And behind me, what you see is like this kind of celestial virtual background with the moon, because I'm really celebrating, you know, space and all things other and all things like extraterrestrial. And because that's just, you know, what we do as disabled folks. Like, we really have to create our own universes, like our own spaces that really that we take control of, that really are unique and eccentric and different. And often, you know, folks don't want to include us like in various spaces as our true authentic selves. So my work is very much rooted in disability advocacy, in graphic design, in photography. I'm also a professor of art and design at Bowie State University, which is the oldest HBCU in Maryland, which is a historically Black college and university. And I really love my role as an educator inside the classroom and also outside of the classroom as well. And you know, really, like, my own disability has really propelled just my definition of access and my definition of mothering as an act of resistance, you know. And I think that to get to Milton's question, it's really rooted in, you know, as Black and brown folks, like, we were really put in a really interesting position when the pandemic hit. And you know, and myself, like, as an artist and as a designer, you know, a lot of us felt disconnected from the artist community, and we knew that we could still build, you know, very empowering and bold messages, but just at a different capacity, at a different level. And some of us just really didn't know if our artwork was going to still have the same impact, because we weren't like in community, you know, like Amy was saying, you know. So it's a very interesting place, and so um to be in. And so I knew that with all of the footage of George Floyd and Elijah McClain and Breonna Taylor, you know, all of those things that Black and brown folks had to just ingest every day, whether we liked it or not. It was just really like just in our faces. And I knew that as an artist and as a mother, as a disabled mother, as a disabled Black woman, as a disabled parent to a disabled kid, I knew that art was the only thing that could help me survive and that could bring me joy. That could bring me joy, but that could hopefully bring my disability community joy. And so it really led to me like re-examining like visual culture and how, you know, racist and how ableist like it was really filtering, and how it continued to be long before the pandemic, and then richly so like once the pandemic hit. Like, we really knew you know, whose folks like who was it really helped to set the tone of who folks really felt were valued, and folks who were disabled were really left in a space where we just felt disposable, not just by, you know, state violence, and you know, police brutality and injustice, but within our own communities, when it came from folks that really felt like, you know, disabled folks just really didn't have a place in this conversation, you know, of opportunity, of visibility. um, and so art is what really helped to just keep me whole, and what really helped me experience like unbridled glee. And I knew that that's what I had to continue to practice, as an artist. And that meant like in whatever artwork that I created, whether it was just a fun experiment like what this symbol was, um, I knew that it had to be shared. And I knew that it wasn't just for me and it wasn't about me. And the minute that I shared it, and the minute that I shared it for free, and it was a poster, and folks were using it all over the globe, I mean, to London and now Brazil, folks just really felt that the symbol spoke. I mean, it spoke like a very rich narrative to the disability community, and it really helped to just amplify justice. Um, and so yeah, you know, art is what really helps us to survive, and it's what really helps us to exist, you know, without, you know, these hierarchical constructs, without these elements of ableism. You know, once you let a disabled artist take control over the artwork, for their own communities, that's when it's going to be that's when I hope that it's going to be free from anything that is rooted against us.
Thanks for getting us started out with that, Jen. And one of the things I'd love to return back to later is how do folks stay creative when they're not in close proximity, because we know that proximity is useful for synergy, but we'll come back to that later. So hold on to that one if you can. And so now I'd love to invite Liat into the screen, and for her to respond to that same question after introducing herself.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you, Milton, and thank you for inviting me to this Longmore talk. I want to first say that I knew Paul before he was an institute. I don't know how I would have felt about being an institute, and maybe Kathy can, you know, talk about that more. But I am so honored to kind of continue on that path. It's not just kind of symbolic to me. It feels kind of a little bit like closure of some of the lineage of where I came from as a scholar activist in the field, and talking with and talking back, you know, to some of that lineage. So thank you for that opportunity, specifically to Kathy and Milton and the Longmore Institute. I also want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you, I'm beaming via Zoom from Chicago, Illinois, which is the traditional territory of the three fire people, the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi nations, amongst others. And just to describe, oh, and I use she and her pronouns. And to describe myself, I'm a pretty femme-looking person. I'm wearing red lipstick for you today. One of the prerogatives of Zoom. I have glasses on. I have now, this is kind of pandemic new, I have gray hair that surfaced. That's my own, I did not dye it gray. I'm in my 40s. I'm wearing a floral shirt and a green shirt over it. And behind me is the cover of my book, Decarcerating Disability. And the cover is a circular design on a faded yellow background that has layers of green concentric circles that spiral from the center and are kind of cut off and kind of looks like a target or wings on a tree or something like that. So now getting to the question, just building off of what people have already talked about, I also take the question to be about COVID plus racial uprising, plus white supremacy, plus all the things that took over us in the past year. And I think it's really important to understand that COVID made visible what was already existing, very much like Amy and Jen already stated. And this is, really reminds me of two things related to how racism and ableism are connected to each other. One is Ruthie Gilmore definition of racism, which she says is, and I quote, state-sanctioned or extra-legal production and exploitation of group-differentiated vulnerability to premature death. So basically how we are all differentially vulnerable to premature death.
Pause for a second, Leon. There's a strange clicking noise. Oh, it just disappeared. So I think we're good. There was a strange ticking that was almost drowning your voice out, but it's gone now. So I apologize for that, but if we could pick back up where you were. I know you're in the middle of Ruthie Gilmore's explanation.
No problem, I appreciate it. It honestly could be my internet.
It might be.
And it's pretty bad, and I apologize. One of the other things about COVID and class and living on stolen land and other things. So Ruthie Gilmore's definition talks about group differentiated vulnerability to premature death, and that's very much tied into the intersection of disability and racism together, and particularly in relation to two things. One is this idea that, well, let me just say 2 points and then I'll end. But in relation to this question, one is particularly in regards to the challenges part of your question, Milton. Mm-hmm. What I feel this moment has brought onto us is a moment of really explosion, perhaps, in the discussion, the discourse, the imagery around abolition, which I think is great. And a lot of people are talking about defunding the police. A lot of people are talking about abolishing prisons. And I think that that is absolutely the work of scholar activists, and particularly activists, and particularly activists of color, of course. And I think that this is an incredible moment of opportunity. But in regards to the challenges, it's a moment that's very fertile for not just co-optation, but also taking the ideas and making them into something else, which is not the same as stealing the ideas. Particularly around this idea of, okay, let's defund the police, let's hire social workers, for example. Or we understand that prison abolition is particularly an abolition for people who are mentally ill, quote unquote, or who are disabled, or who are gender non-conforming, or who are young. Those are people that should not be in prison. And I want to say that a lot of us have a lot of issues with those assumptions. First of all, the assumption of let's defund the police, hire social workers, of course, is very problematic because social workers also are a mechanism of surveillance. They're mandatory reporters. They're the ones who take kids away from their parents. I mean, there's a whole history of that. And of course, Dorothy Roberts talks about that. And Jen actually, talks about that too. And I think that it's really important to push back against it for two reasons. One is that like I said, mechanism of surveillance, but also that psychiatrization and criminalization are connected, and we can't really abolish one without the other. And medicalization and um, and criminalization are connected, and we can't abolish prisons without thinking about medical industrial complex, and without thinking about psychiatry, and without thinking about all of those institutions of violence. And the second point, and then I'll end, is that this kind of thinking, this kind of population should not be in prison. Of course, we should abolish prison for disabled people, for young people, for non sex offenders, and so on and so on. Is that means that we're still keeping prisons, right? And I think it's really important to think about sites of incarceration very, very broadly, as I've done in all my work, and thinking about nursing homes as sites of incarceration, thinking about group homes, psychiatric institutions, institutions for people with intellectual disabilities. And this is, I want to give a shout out to Dustin Gibson and other people who do this work on the ground, and a lot of local organizing that are happening. I want to say that this is so important in the moment of racial uprising and the moment of COVID, because these are exactly the places, prisons and nursing homes, in which have the highest population of COVID, and of course, a very high population of people of color. So, this is a great opportunity, the moment of abolition, but we have to be intersectional, and we have to connect those two movements.
So if I can get you to stay on for a little bit longer in response to the second question, Liat, you've got me thinking about a couple things. We'll circle back to this, but I'm thinking about this notion of carcerality and institutionalization as a way of imposing certain sets of assumptions about fitness. So I'd like to return to that because there seems to be a strong parallel. But one of the questions I think I'd love for all of you to respond to is that your presence here on this webinar and in this talk is some evidence of your resilience in the moment, right? We all made it this far and we're here, and that we actually have things to share about, and we're actually in a fairly positive space around what we have to contribute. So I'm wondering in particular, are there any collaborations or partnerships you've been involved in that have proven to be particularly buoying or nutrient for you in this present time?
Yes, that's a great question. So I've been involved with a bunch of other magnificent beings in a response to the kind of thing that I was just talking about. And people can read our statement at abolitionanddisabilityjustice.com. And the point of that statement was, to kind of talk about some of the issues I just raised, and the whole project of working on that statement together was incredibly very collective and really nourishing, even though it was incredibly hard also, and traumatizing, and talking about system of oppression, like nobody thinks it's fun, but the fact that we found each other, right? And we found each other, this was like a national effort, and we found each other via email and so on, I think is also something that was only possible now. This kind of immediacy of, okay, let's just Zoom, across like time zones. And so I think that was, something I want to highlight. And then the second thing is just crip and mad modes of survival. I remember very early in the pandemic, like 2 months into it, into lockdown, I talked to a crip friend of mine, Carrie Kaufman, who also lives in Chicago and is an amazing activist and artist and scholar. And we both identify as being crip. I forgot to say at the beginning that I have a disability and I identify as crip. And we were talking about how for us it was kind of like, okay, can't leave the house, fine. You know, like we kind of know that, right? Like can't get to the place because not accessible. Okay, you know, PA can't come. I mean, it's not okay, but this is how we live, right? So it was just kind of, you know, it took us maybe another hour or something, but you know, we basically just we're very adaptable creatures in that way because we have to. Like, I'm not saying this is necessary. First of all, like, don't put us under these circumstances, but we have been put under the circumstances. This was not new. So, you know, this kind of like survivability and adaptability, I thought was incredibly useful to talk about in kind of CRIP and MAD and disability communities.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. That's actually really helpful. I think one of the things that's been really interesting in this moment is thinking about shifting the narratives from being marginalized as purely a deficit framing and beginning to illuminate the fact that there are tremendous competencies that are developed as a function of navigating. Not that, again, as you said, not that we should be put in a position to navigate, but that navigation is not purely about deficits. It's also about the kinds of assets and understandings of the world that accrue with that. And so we'll cycle back around to this, but I'd love to give Jen an opportunity to respond to that question. So thanks, Leah. I appreciate it. So Jen, responding to that second question, I'm thinking about partnerships or collaborations that have proven to be buoying or nutrient for you. And you started to talk about that a little bit in your first answer, but I'm wondering if you'd like to delve a little bit deeper into that or to highlight any in particular.
Yeah, great question. And some of my best partnerships have come directly from like the relationships that I have with other disabled advocates and activists, like on social media. You know, so many uplifting voices like Imani Barbarin, Alice Wong, so many dope, amazing people, Mariah Person, you know, all accessibility. So many folks that I just love and adore, who have really helped to make room for truth and disability voices. Carrie Gray, Justin, you know, Shorter, and the named advocates. And so being able to let them know that, listen, like, I'm an artist, I'm a designer, I'm a resource. You know, I'm here to help. I'm here to collaborate. I said earlier that designing, it's not necessarily about commercialism to me. It's really about visibility. It's really about accessibility, availability, like being there for your people to create work for the people and by the people. I mean, that's when you know that it's like it's in its truest, most authentic and genuine form. So just my people, like, I mean, just creating partnerships with those. And then once, you know, the design work was really rooted in community, that's when folks, you know, from the woodworks were paying attention. Google, Nike, Converse, and, you know, come do, you know, like zine making workshops with us, you know, where we talk a little bit about creating really safe spaces for like our disabled community. Because here, you know, like, and it was like, you know, corporations reaching out, wanting for me to come and chat, like just with their, you know, disability employee networks, and being able to kind of hold space for those companies that I never necessarily felt that I could design in or be a part of. So it was a really interesting space. And then shout out to Black disabled creatives and Jillian Mercado, being able to kind of watch that platform rise. You know, where artists are encouraged to say, hey, like, this is me, this is who I am, hire me, like, I'm available, I do film, I do design, I do photography. And we recently got a really beautiful shout on Google Stories, where they had a really nice write-up with Jillian and Diversify Photo, and they were able to profile a few disabled, you know, Black and brown designers who, and we've been out here for decades, you know, like putting in the work and teaming up with like activists and educators. Like, we do so many things. Like we have so many hats. And so just having conversations with the right people for the right reasons, and realizing that, you know, we're not alone, and that we can be in this together. Um, you know, as long as we understand that um, creating like this world cannot be done like in a silo, you know. I say all the time, like, collective liberation cannot be done like in a silo. It can't be done like in this inward space. I mean, a lot of people create magic, you know, just on their own, and you know, and just what some artists have been able to do in isolation is has been really wowing and beautiful to see. um but look what happens when multiple people are sharing it. Look what happens when multiple people are offering to share it for you on your behalf, you know, connecting you with other spaces who want to use your artwork at a protest. And that's really what happened. Like, it took for me to like realize that my work doesn't have to necessarily exist on the screen through this pandemic. I was safe, and I joined a whole bunch of you know, named advocates and Carrie Gray, and we were all down there and marching from the AAPD to all the way down to the White House. It was in June. It was like a really hot day. It was intense, but I mean, we were all out there, like, you know, Black deaf folks and folks in wheelchairs, folks with canes. I mean, you know, folks who are autistic, you know, folks who had ADHD and who necessarily couldn't handle the heat and couldn't handle the crowds. But we were like, no, like, we are out here, you know, like, we exist, and we want for folks to be able to make space and to make room for us with disabilities. Like, we can be out here protesting. And folks have been protesting, you know, like, the disability community has been out there like for, I mean, for decades, you know, really galvanizing the community. But to know that at this stage, in isolation, that we can still come together. So really, partnerships, you know, at the end of the day, yeah, Nike can call and Google can call me and Twitter can call me, but you know, it's really about the community. It's really about having a conversation on Twitter with another disability advocate at like 3 a.m., you know, saying like, hey, like, I'm having a hard time, like, I can't find a designer to help me with this logo. And you know, can you help out? And I'm like, I'll see what I can do. If I can't do it, I'll pass it along to a student. But sometimes I get more satisfaction designing for my disabled, you know, buddies, um, you know, versus kind of like sitting on Zoom, you know, in a very academic, you know, rough environment. So I'm learning a lot about how community is really the power for me. Like, I can't really exist without those amazing collaborations.
Great, thanks for
And
that.
there's
So
yeah, there's some really great questions too, like
I
in the
was I was
Q&A. I
going to
hope
say I
that,
was going to
yeah.
point out I was going to point out question number 3 for you. I'm going to cycle back
Yes.
to Amy to get her to answer this second question, but I definitely
Yes.
want you to circle back around to the question about recommendations for disabled designers, and you know, if you to start over again, what do you wish you knew then when you started? But let's hear from Amy first, and then we'll cycle back through these. So thanks for pointing that out. So Amy, in response to that question, I'm thinking, are there particular partnerships, collaborations that you're finding nutrient for you, or that are inspiring and helping you grow your work or think differently about your work?
Yeah, thank you. This is Amy speaking. So I'll talk about 2 kind of main places in my life where I see this happening. One, and both of these have to do with relationships that have been built over long periods of time, where now I'm really kind of seeing how being disabled and also being part of disability community is taking shape in the forms of like care that I participate in and receive. So about 3 or 4 years ago, the Nashville Disability Justice Collective formed. It kind of splintered off from the Nashville Feminist Collective, because there are a lot of disabled people in town who were kind of developing disability justice analysis. And we were also very tired of like constantly being called in to do accessibility work for other people who weren't otherwise doing very much to include us. And so we were doing a lot of activism around accessibility in town, but through that, we built a lot of relationships. We developed ways to have our meetings, remote participation, even before the pandemic. I mean, this was years ago. We were like live streaming and doing live captioning and things like that. Doing a lot of work on community care and coordinating resources. And so when the pandemic started, almost everyone in that collective ended up also doing mutual aid organizing just right away, for the city more generally, because we had all these structures in place and relationships in place, and we were providing support for each other, but also doing political education for non-disabled people about what interdependence means and how to practice it, or how to deal when we have conflicting needs, and how to figure out how to distribute resources. And so I was really lucky to get to participate in that. And as we started doing research about other mutual aid collectives all over the US, we started to find that many of them were also, their leadership was disabled people, and often disabled people of color. And so in the summer, so I do this podcast called Contra that's on disability and design. And we did a series on mutual aid and disability during COVID, where I interviewed people who were doing mutual aid organizing through a disability justice perspective, and learned a lot about how disability is kind of what makes it possible for many of us to do this work, and to organize in ways that are sustainable for us. And also like understand our community, not just as non-disabled white activists, which is sometimes what happens. So the other thing is, I've been also very lucky for the last 4 or 5 years to direct the Critical Design Lab, which is a collaboratory of disabled designers and design researchers and artists. And we basically take material forms or media forms that exist often without consideration of disability, and we bring a disability culture approach to those. And so that includes like the way that we make our podcast, the way that we work on public accessibility projects. We're curating an art exhibition right now. And we also have these dance parties. And I just want to like talk about the dance parties a little bit, because there's something that came out of COVID about a year ago. I mean, it was probably like in late March. One of the members of the lab is Kevin Gotkin, who also goes by DJ Who Girl. And his project is called Crip Nightlife. And it's about how disabled people historically have pursued very specific ways of having nightlife and having parties and celebrating. And that disability really is about kind of like celebration and community. And there's specific ways of doing that that non-disabled people wouldn't necessarily know about. And so we created this Crip Nightlife event called Remote Access. And we have these parties just about quarterly. There's another one coming up in April. And what happens is like you come to the party, and if you were at a party in real life, like in non-virtual space, you'd be like eating chips in the corner or whatever. But at our party, the activity is that you participate in access. So there are people who do live image descriptions. There are people who show art. There's ASL interpretation. There's CART. There's description of the like there's audio description of the music, like the DJ set. And everyone who goes to the party is constantly participating and doing this together. And so it really does carry an aesthetics of Crip joy and interdependence. And a lot of disabled artists also come and show their work. And so that collaboration has been really important for me in this moment, because what it shows is that disability culture is not just about like catching non-disabled people up to how to do accessibility better. It's actually about the art that we create with access, and that access has an aesthetic, and it has a way of like training all of us to be in interdependence together. And there are a number of other collaborations that have also been really important to me that kind of build on all of these. And one in particular is with Alice Wong from the Disability Visibility Project. She's just like amazing, and I feel very lucky to get to work with her on the projects that we do, and constantly learning and growing through.
Now, I appreciate that, Amy. So your response to that question actually provides an excellent segue into our second round of questions. And one of them is thinking about how do we broaden the scope of how we understand or reconceptualize activism, right? So we're coming off of this summer, and throngs of people flooded out into the streets and raised their voices and did a variety of things. And it was an impressive display of force and power and conscience. And yet it tends to solidify the notion that activism is about, hitting the streets, putting, feet to the streets. And I know that that's one way of showing up, but there are many ways of showing up. And I think the disability community in particular has been astoundingly adaptive and innovative. And so I'm wondering, are there some things in this moment that you want to make sure that we hold on to and maybe amplify in terms of different strategies or approaches to activism? Or how do we keep the framework wide enough so that people can situate themselves in it in a useful way? Is that making sense?
Would you like me to answer that right now?
Yeah, I would. And then I'm going to pivot to Liat after your answer, and I'm going to try to get Liat to respond to this question number 4 about disentangling systems, and we'll sort of keep on this thread, but we'll tie it back to that question in particular.
Great. Well, I love this question. So I'll say that I'm trained as a feminist scholar, and I also, in my scholarship, I study the history of disability activism and also disability access. And what those two things do together for me is that activism for me in my scholarship and in my personal practice have never really been about like those, like exclusively about those big public demonstrations and direct actions. Certainly, like I participate in those sometimes, and those have been really big parts of disability history. Like we think about the Capitol crawl, when disabled people left behind chairs and crutches and crawled up the Capitol building to advocate for the ADA. But one of the things that I write about in my book, which is called Building Access, is that leading up to the ADA for decades before that, disabled architects and designers were doing all of these other kinds of activism that people didn't really ever see because it was behind the scenes. So they were doing things like writing a curriculum to train architects about disability, which is really similar to what feminist scholars do, to kind of use the curricular change to advocate for like a different understanding of gender, for example. They were like working with product designers to change the messaging. They were trying to change how people got licensed as designers, like all of these things. And they were using very similar tactics, and like all the discursive stuff was actually not that different from what the disability rights movement was doing. And so for me, like it kind of raises this, it's like a method of activism that's just like a little bit more stealth. Mm-hmm. And I think about Stefano Harney and Fred Moten's idea of the undercommons, and the idea that activism happens whenever we're kind of like meeting up with each other and building relationships, and that's the stuff that kind of buoys everything else. And so, like Jen's work is an example of this too, that like something like a symbol can be so transformative um, as an act of activism, like her act of activism, but then also how that symbol gets replicated in the world. Or someone like Alice Wong, whose activism is um, collecting the stories of disabled people and leaving an archive, leaving memory. Um, there's so many examples of this. And the thing that I think that has had a lasting impact on me is that when I was involved in the Occupy movement, which is like 10 years ago now, there was a whole contingent that was called Occupy from Home. And it was people who were supporting Occupy from their beds and like who just, were using technology and doing phone trees and things like that. And so, that activism has looked a lot of different ways, and no one part of that has been less transformative than any of the other parts.
Yeah, that's really powerful, Amy. I'm thinking the couple words that resonated for me are curation and illumination, right? That are direct responses to assumed disposability, right? And so by illuminating the underbelly or the undercarriage of these systems and also curating the voices of those who might otherwise not be curated is a way of, is a profoundly powerful way of a form of activism. So thank you. So let's pivot to Liat. And as we think about these different ways of reconceptualizing activism, Liat, there's this question number 4 in the audience that was really a response to your last statement. So it says, the question is, how would you suggest going about police reform for domestic violence, mental health calls, if not for the addition of social workers? And so I think sometimes what's challenging, but also an opportunity in this moment, is as we shift to a systemic or structural analysis of inequity, we can understand that there may be a need to disentangle the systems. And so I think that this question is rooted in that, but sometimes it's difficult to disentangle the systems if we don't understand the relationships between the pieces. I'm not necessarily suggesting that the author of the question doesn't understand it, but it is a provocative question. So I'm wondering, is there a way to attend to that question and also think a little bit about how are we expanding or complicating notions of activism in this moment as well?
Sure, I can give it a try. I don't know if we're able to screen share. It's to a website, so I can also just post the link. It doesn't matter. I'm gonna try, and you can tell me if it's working. So can you all see the website now?
Yeah.
So this is, thank you. This is the website I was referring to, the Abolition and disabilityjustice.com. And in it, we have a very kind of, to us short, to other people probably very wordy, set of guiding principle based on disability justice about that question. What do we do if we both defund the police and not hire social workers? And the answer is pretty varied, but I'm just going to throw some collective answers because, again, this is not my knowledge. This is collective knowledge and also knowledge that came to us from ancestors in a variety of movements. I think it's important to kind of acknowledge that. And I'm not going to mention the other people in the collective because I didn't ask permission to do that. If people want more information about that, I'm happy to share. It's not like a secret. Anyway, leadership by the most impacted, particularly peer-led and initiated programs and resources and support. So who do you call if you're in a mental health crisis? It would be awesome to call people who also experienced the mental health crisis and would know how to guide you through it, wouldn't it? If you hear voices, it would be hear voices of people and things that are not manifesting to other people around you. Also would be great to experience the experience of other people who also hear voices and see things that other people can't see or hear. And this is related to validating the experiences of people within disability community and neurodivergent community, and particularly people who are most impacted. So people who are people of color within these communities, people who are incarcerated within these communities, and so on. And so we have here like a variety of suggestions, including, this is something Angela Davis talks a lot about, this notion of scaling up.
Mhm.
That we have experienced in our society and culture, basically a process of scaling down. We really don't have skills anymore to answer even the most kind of rudimentary thing, like my neighbor is having a party and it's like way too loud. What do? I call the cops. Somebody sexually harassed me. What do? I call the cops. Do you see how ridiculous that is? That it's the same entity, but why don't I have the skills to talk to my neighbor about how loud the music is? And not just skills, but I should have said at the beginning, I'm a kind of pretty petite white woman who's disabled, and maybe I don't feel safe going to my neighbor who may be otherwise situated and maybe has a weapon. I don't know. Maybe is a white supremacist, maybe all kinds of things. So how do we build communities that can respond then to the neighbor? But also, how do we build communities that can respond if I was sexually harassed or harmed in any kind of way? So the answer to the question is we do it in community. And for people who are interested, you can look at our other kind of ideas and suggestions that we built in community and out of vast experience of doing transformative justice and other forms of justice and healing. And to connect that to the your question, and then I'll conclude. But it's very much related to, you talked about structures and how we have to understand structures in order to answer a question like that. And one of course, the structures that, made this discussion of abolition and last summer, possible, is COVID, and how COVID has affected everybody and affected everybody globally. Right? I mean, that is something unprecedented, almost. And of course, a lot of things affect us globally, like capitalism, for example. But it felt like we're much more connected to people around the world. It made our connections clearer, but it also identified that we can't rely on the state to fix things that the state intentionally made broken. And this is what Kimberly Crenshaw is Crensaw, called disaster white supremacy. This is what she's calling COVID. And she says the pre-existing condition is not diabetes to COVID. The pre-existing condition to COVID is white supremacy. And of course, she's building on Naomi Klein's formulation of disaster capitalism. But of course, those two are related, capitalism and white supremacy. So I think the structural has been made more visible, like the curtain has been lifted in a lot of ways for a lot of people that are, especially young people, that have maybe not experienced the moments of racial uprising in the 70s. I didn't, also because I'm not American, I'm not a US citizen, and I wasn't here. But the moments of racial uprisings in the 70s, which are part of what I research, particularly I researched the connection in those moments of racial uprising, anti-prison organizing, and anti-psychiatry, and disability activism in that moment in the 70s. For people who have not experienced that, this was the moment, this year, in which they became awakened to this. And so lastly, I want to say in relation to your question, and then I'll end, what the present moment has surfaced in terms of new possibilities. And oh my God, I love Amy's provocations with the parties that you should all go to and are amazing. So my thing is not as kind of visceral, but I do want to say that in my work, I talk about the lessons that I learned, particularly from deinstitutionalization,
Mhm.
activism. How do we get people out of carceral spaces through the framework of deinstitutionalization? And one of the things that I learned from it is what I'm calling, and what I learned from abolition, doing abolition work more generally, is what I'm calling dis epistemology. Dis is DIS, like disability, DIS epistemology, meaning uh, letting go of certain ways of knowing,
Mhm.
letting go of certain ways of knowing, particularly the fact that we must have an answer right now to everything, you know, which we talk a lot about quip time in disability culture. We move collectively in disability communities, in quip communities, through quip time. We do not have like an immediate answer to stuff, nor do we gather immediately. And you know, this is a lesson that we learn. But also there is an urgency and an immediacy to this. We also cannot wait until all the alternatives are in place. This is not how deinstitutionalization happened. You know, people didn't say, okay, we can't release people from institutions, particularly people with intellectual disabilities. We must wait until all the alternatives are in place. No, this is not how it happened. You learn by doing, and this is a collective trial and error. And I think that this is an incredibly important lesson for our time as well.
I love the concept of crip time, and I think it's really important in this moment. I certainly understand the sense of urgency, but oftentimes the urgency is rooted in the desire to quell a sense of dissonance rather than to address the root causes. And I think, particularly when we're moving through these paradigm shifts from thinking about, to use the language of a colleague of mine, Glenn Adams, the prejudice problematic, where we're thinking about inequity in terms of an individualistic thing, into the illumination of these systems and structures, is that if we assume that we've been in this sort of shrouded space for at least 50 years, this sort of colorblind space, that the reality is that unless people have been in the conversations, they literally can't see what is necessary. And in this case, we may need to rely on communities that have been in the sustained struggle for a long period of time. So this notion of crip time that balances patience and urgency is really, really important. And I love that concept. So thank you. It also resonates with something that Amy shared. When they shared their piece, they were talking about creating scaffolds or pathways that unleash future possibilities as they emerge. I mean, that wasn't their language, but that's what I took from the concept. So let's pull Jen into this conversation. It seems like we're starting to get down towards the neck of the funnel, and starting to think about how do we move forward from this moment, right? We've talked a little bit about the kind of innovations that have been useful, the kind of collaborations that have been useful, and some of the lessons that have been learned. But we know that the road to healing and repair is going to take some time. It's not going to happen overnight. And again, the losses that we've countenanced across various communities have been horrendous. And I think those will take even longer to recover from. But I'm also strangely hopeful about this moment, both in terms of the shift in paradigms, right? Moving to a systemic or structural analysis, but also the massive outpouring of people who were just sick and tired, you know, of the injustice. So what are some things that are providing you with a sense of hope and possibility presently? And I'm also going to ask if you can find a way to wrap in that question from an audience member thinking about, disabled designer, what would you share with somebody getting their start now? If you knew what you knew now when you started, what would you share?
Yes, excellent. And I'm having a blast, everybody. Like, this is so beautiful. So I just wanted to give a shout to our panelists and to Twitter. Twitter is like on fire right now. Like, people are just like really uplifting this whole entire exchange, and it's really it's making me super happy. So in terms of like what is really providing me hope, as a disabled parent, as an disabled educator, as a disabled artist, it's really just transparency, and authenticity, and knowing that within my disabled community, like there's a safe space to exist in that way. And I definitely want to be able to see more of that in the abled world, and making sure that we're not necessarily celebrated when we are no longer here, when we're dead, when we've been murdered, when we've been killed, when we've been disposed of, when we've been kidnapped, when we've been abused. Those are the conversations that I'm really hoping that we don't continue to uplift or to make room for, because that's very oppressive for me, as being a woman, a Black, Afro-Latina woman, is just, it's a very oppressive space to exist in, when I'm celebrating or when I'm celebrating like my disability community, like in sadness, which is why like my artwork is why my design process and my creative practice is so rooted in joy and uplifting like disability like existence, and honoring like that space and who we are like at this moment, like right now, through like my stutter, through like through me being distracted and my mind going in a million different places, and me being super excited and wanting to like fidget like so bad, but trying not to, but knowing that I can if I wanted to, because knowing that this is a safe space for that. So mad respect to critical design lab and mapping access and Amy and Josh and what all of y'all are doing, because it's just such a safe space to be in, and Crip Joy. And I'm so excited about holding space for that hashtag and holding space for those words, and continuing to hold space for autistic joy and what that means for my family. And to get to that question, that amazing question about what are some of the things and the recommendations as like a disabled designer, and it really goes, it's really rooted in create the artwork that you don't see, create for the community that where they feel like they don't necessarily have a presence. And people are doing that all the time, like through media, through blogging, through disability justice, through community actions, through dance parties, you know what I mean? And all of that's really where you can get started, is just being in community with those spaces, and realizing that you really have to check yourself and really check like the true purpose of your artwork, like check like the intention, like who are you designing for? And and one of my friends like Ramon Tejada said this the other night. It's like, design for your family, design for your mom, design for your dad. And even if they don't necessarily understand the language or understand like what your work is rooted in, like by God, do it. Because the minute that I started to become super vulnerable and super comfortable like in the true purpose of like celebrating like disability joy, like my parents were no longer questioning like my intentions. Like they knew very much like what my heart and my soul was rooted in, especially when it came to uplifting like my son Knox, who's a Black and autistic kid. You know, he's 8 years old and he's always going to be autistic and he's always going to be amazing. And so what is my design work and my art practice really holding for him now? Like, how is it creating like a place of safety, a place of love, a place of acceptance, a place of support for him now? And my zine, my photo zine entitled Knox Rocks, you know, on the front cover, that was taken by my editor's Homie House Press. Shout out to Adriana and Got There Right Now, Homie House Press, check them out. The cover of the zine, it's like me and Knox rustling on the carpet, you know, and he's like pulling my hair and we're like smiling, and I was like, we can't put that on the cover, like not for my first photo book, like what are people going to think, what is the community going to think? And it was really like my first entry into, but this is what we should celebrate. We should celebrate like this beautiful chaotic moment where like a mother, a disabled mother and her son, a Black and brown disabled mother and her son are embracing while they're existing like right now in the present. And we're not celebrating this after the fact. We're not celebrating him like, you know, one day when and God forbid, and it's hard for me and it's very triggering to talk about this, but knowing that he's like a Black disabled kid, that I may not have him for long, you know, I may not be here for a long time, God forbid, you know, and I'm speaking from the heart and from the soul, and this is what this talk is supposed to be rooted in. It's supposed to be rooted in transparency. And so the hope is really rooted in celebrating like your community, celebrating your people as we are now, as we exist now. Like everyone who's on this panel is like really celebrating those spaces and really, you know, holding conversations for those moments that really need to be uplifted, and those spaces, and where we're talking about like the, you know, like the hard moments, but all of those moments are really, they really come from a place of joy and of the pain, where, you know, where we're just celebrating, you know, disability and what that means for us, you know. And it's overwhelming to talk about it, but it, you know, it's really rooted in transparency, and the artwork isn't always going to be pretty, and it's not going to necessarily be commercial or popular. But if you're really designing for the disability community, like, no, like, you know, Kia Brown and Disabled and Cute and everything that those really beautiful spaces like represent, like we need to be able to design for like what we don't see, period. And we need to uplift that and we need to support that. So that's like that's where you really need to start. You really need to start with vulnerability and like, you know, the narrative and the design work that's like really rooted in like you and really what you want to say and what you don't see. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. So I'm looking at our time. We've got about 15 minutes left, and there's a question that's getting a lot of audience attention. So I think we should probably give it some time. And so maybe we start with, we go from Liat to Amy, and we'll come back to you, Jen, and then we'll probably move towards a close. But the question that's posted is, how might an organization's employee resource group help inform, educate, or transform colleagues so they may raise their bar in the understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging? It says this work can be done with its members, allies, and ability networks, but as well as across ERGs as intersectional, including veterans, pride, women, parents, communities of color. So maybe an easier way of sort of getting at it is, how do we move from diversity and inclusion? How do we move it from a space that can be performative to something that is deeply rooted and actually helps to transform institutions? And so maybe Liat, since you've talked about your work of abolition, maybe we could start with you, transition to Amy, then come back to Jen, and then we'll move towards a close. I think that'll probably be plenty.
It is. You got more? That is plenty. So just very briefly, you know, one of the things, and I want to bring it full circle maybe to Paul, I think that's kind of how I want to end, maybe is, you know, Paul talked about moving from the first phase to the second phase. I mean, he talked about a lot of things, but one of the things is that, and the first phase of disability was, you know, anti-discrimination accommodations and things of that nature. And the second phase is disability culture, right? This kind of collectivity that we talked about earlier that manifests in different kind of ways. I mean, I think he mostly referred to it as kind of quest for collective identity and celebration of difference, med pride and crip pride and neurodiversity and all of that. And I think that the question posted can be answered from those perspectives, but I'm going to kind of push on it a little bit and answer it from more of a disability justice perspective and say that, just like I said earlier, the state, like I said about the state cannot fix what it broke intentionally. The same thing about inclusion, right? So there's a lot of mechanisms in which, quite frankly, a lot of us, especially in abolitionist movement, but other radical movements, do not want to be a part of. So we don't want to be included in the military, right? This comes from queer kind of critiques and feminist critiques. We don't want to be a part of exploitive or actually any kind of capitalist, which is exploitive systems. And so this whole idea of let's create more inclusion really is antithetical to disability justice and what it wants. So part of it, we can go the route of disability culture and say, we need to create our own kind of spaces and organizing and, things that in relation to your question about joy. And I think disability justice is related to that. It's not the same thing as disability culture by any means. It's a more kind of anti-capitalist framework, more radical in the sense of going to the root, as Angela Davis often explains. And so I think to me, I would push on this question of inclusion. And I do that a lot in my book to show that in order to be included, you have to be really assimilated. I mean, it's very hard to be a person of color and queer and disabled in the kind of traditional able in the non-able disabled kind of way, right? Particularly people who are nonverbal, for example, particularly people who are in mental health crisis, for example. Inclusion is very hard to think of on those terms. And I think not because we shouldn't, but because I think that shows us the way, actually. I mean, I think that those things that are quote unquote harder to include really shows us the way towards creating really meaningful, they're not alternatives because alternatives is using the system's language, but they are, same as I answered before, more kind of like peer formations, things that are outside of this kind of language of diversity and multiculturalism that I think, and maybe this is the third phase, maybe this is the fourth phase, I don't know, but I think to me, this is where we're at.
Thank you. And maybe if you could close just sort of briefly, Liat, what gives you joy in the work?
This is really hard for me because, like I said, when we did this discussion earlier, I'm Jewish, and so we cannot have joy. It's forbidden. I'm only half kidding about that. But I would say this gave me a lot of joy, and I really want to thank everybody that came here. I want to thank all the panelists and you, Milton, and everybody that organized us together. It's actually been my first time kind of meeting Jen and being on a panel with Jen and Amy and grappling with some of these questions collectively. And it really did provide me a great amount of joy.
Great. I could simply share that I'm appreciating this too, and wish we had some more time, and hopefully we get to do it again. So thank you, Liat. So Amy, if I can get you to sort of jump back in and respond to that that last question that's in the box, and also share with us a bit what gives you joy in the work. And if you could try to do that in 5 minutes, then we'll have 5 minutes for Jen, and then we'll be able to wrap up on time.
Yeah, I'll just echo everyone else that this being on this panel is a joy, and getting to talk to you, Milton, and to Jen and Liat, and to get all these great questions, I think is wonderful, and this feels really nourishing and sustaining, because I've been in my house for a year, and there's just like a lot about that that's not great. So thank you also to Emily and Kathy for organizing this event. I'll say really quickly about this question, about how to get like colleagues to do something more transformative around disability than just diversity, equity, and inclusion. I recently read an amazing book by Jane McAlevey, McAlevey, I think is how she spells her last name. It's called No Shortcuts. And it's about how to organize mass movements. And Jane McAlevey is, she's been a union organizer for like 30 years and also is a scholar. And in her research and activism, she found that the way that you get a lot of ordinary people to show up and mobilize and invest in solidarity with each other, even if they don't think an issue affects them, is to get them to have the same analysis about how the structure works and what's wrong with it.
Yeah.
And so there's so many examples of like nurses and bus drivers unions and like, you know, all these people. And I was thinking about how this explained something that happened to me that I was like, oh, I can't believe that worked. But it did, which is that a few years ago, I was trying to get accessibility to happen on my campus. And, you know, just like the state, the institution was kind of like, we're complying with the law, and that wasn't true. And so what we did through my lab was we organized these events called mapathons, where we got people like faculty, students, staff to come and go out with surveys and assess the accessibility of the built environment. And we said we were just building maps to share with other disabled people about where to go to the bathroom and stuff. But what happened was that all these people suddenly developed an analysis of how inaccessible the campus was. And that basically directly caused the university to begin a strategic planning process for 40 years that determined how to raise money, how to make buildings accessible, how to transform the campus. And it also created a parallel discourse amongst faculty about not just disability as like a diversity issue, but all of the different ways of thinking about disability, especially intersectionally. And that was how we framed the project, that access to space is a disability issue, it's a gender issue, it's a race issue, a class issue. So I just offer that to say that if you want people to think about difference in transformative ways, you need to give them opportunities to develop the same analysis. And the best way to do that is by involving the leadership of the people who are most impacted, and kind of creating these like encounters with barriers that exist.
I love that. It's sort of the idea that if the default design is one of devaluation, then in some ways it's a reverse design system that assumes that everybody has value rather than the opposite of that. So I love that strategy. Maybe a last thought on something that brings you joy. I know you started with a little bit of that, but is there something that brings you joy in the work?
Yes, plants. I love plants.
Plants or plants?
Mm-hmm. Plants.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. So thank you, Amy. Thank you so much. It's been a joy to be in conversation with you, and I'm hoping we get to do it again. And so, Jen, sort of wrapping up, you know, on this conversation. I'd love to get some last thoughts from you.
Yeah. just keep making, everybody. I'm speaking tonight as an artist, as a parent, who constantly doubts herself, who constantly has bouts of internalized ableism and self-doubt and imposter syndrome. Like, just try to remove it as much as you can, or else it'll hold you back. And keep making for no reason, keep making, like, when you get that gut feeling that that inner voice inside of you just needs to get something out, because ultimately that is what is going to be that ultimate transformation for you and for everyone around you. And I'm just speaking from experience. The minute that I decided to just stay oppressed, it just wasn't a good place. So just keep moving forward. Keep making whatever that process is like for you, even if it's just organizing a Zoom like this to be in conversation and to be in space with amazing perspectives and amazing you know just humans. So I just really celebrate and honor, like, just this moment, and how much, similar to what Liat was saying, like how much joy it brings me to be able to just use you know to use like a platform to be able to build more and more community, to make new friends. Like, this is my first panel with Liat and Amy, and it's just been phenomenal. So thank you, Milton, and shout out to the interpreters and everybody for coming through tonight. I love you. I've been seeing you on Twitter. I'm retweeting you. So thank you for the follows, and thank you for the shouts of affirmation. It really means a lot. And we're just getting started. So watch this space, watch this panel, and everything that we're doing, because we're coming.
No, I so appreciate that, Jen. And as I've said to the other panelists, it's just been a delight and a pleasure. And I'm hoping this is actually the beginning of a conversation rather than the end. Sort of taking a little bit of moderator privilege, I'm just sort of thinking back about, what Amy shared about the idea of getting everybody into the same concept. And so there's an upcoming opportunity I'm just going to give a shout out to, called From Small Beginnings, and it's coming out of the UK. But the goal is to push a global reckoning with eugenics. And, from my work and the ideas that I play with, eugenics is really at the root of the patterns of hierarchical devaluation that continue to reverberate around the globe. And the sooner that we get into understanding that history, the sooner we can get into interrogating and, either probably creating new institutions, but not institutions in a traditional way, or alternative forms of being together. So look for From Small Beginnings. It'll be coming this summer. So look out for that. So with that, again, I want to give a shout out to the interpreters who've done a wonderful job, to our panelists, to the Paul K. Longmore Institute. If you've enjoyed tonight's session or have been able to participate in any other Longmore events, we'd love your support. Pretty soon, I think a link will pop into the chat, and that link will allow you to make a tax-deductible donation to the Longmore Institute. But providing resources or finance is not the only way that you can support Longmore. We'd love to be a known commodity all the way around the globe, and we're doing that these days through these Zoom events. But if you know somebody who would benefit from being connected to Longmore, would like to know more about Longmore's work, we'd love you to share that. We'd also love a donation too, if that's within your means, and we'd appreciate that. But as much as anything, I want to thank everybody who's taken the time to be here with us tonight, to drink in the riches from these wonderful scholars that we've had the opportunity to share time with. And we look forward to seeing you at our next event. So thanks for being here. Thank you to Longmore Institute for hosting and inviting me to moderate. And we look forward to seeing you at the next event. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.
Purple and Gold Text with Purple and Gold Writing reading. Thank you for watching. Please follow us on our social media, on Facebook at SFSU Disability, on Twitter at LongmoreInst, and online at longmoreinstitute.sfsu.edu.